Welcome to the recorded version of the Grantmakers and Aging Web Seminar, How Our Eyes Age, The Impact on Everyday Life, featuring Chris Girkin, Professor and Chair of the Department of Ophthalmology at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, Cynthia Owsley, Professor in the University of Alabama Department of Ophthalmology, Torrey DeKeyser, Executive Director of the Eyesight Foundation of Alabama, and John Feather, CEO of Grantmakers and Aging. From September 5th, 2014. This event was made possible by a partnership between Grantmakers and Aging, the John A. Hartford Foundation, and the SCAN Foundation. Technical and production support is provided by the American Society on Aging.
Thanks, Steve, and welcome to everyone. As Steve mentioned, this is part of our monthly conversations with Grantmakers and Aging, part of our continuing series of monthly webinars on critical topics across the whole field of aging. Today's session is entitled, How Our Eyes Age, The Impact on Everyday Life. As Steve mentioned, I'm the CEO of Grantmakers and Aging, and I'm delighted that so many of you have joined us today. Before we begin, I want to thank those whose support is making today's webinar available free of charge to our audience. The John A. Hartford Foundation of New York provides continuing support for this series, Research to Prevent Blindness, and the Eyesight Foundation of Alabama. I also want to thank the expert team at the American Society on Aging for providing technical and production support for the series. We all know how crucial our vision is to our ability to function, but often we really don't think much about our eyes until something limits our vision. Our guest today will discuss the impact of aging-related vision changes on everyday activities, such as reading the mail, shopping, cooking, walking safely, and driving, as well as offering suggestions for healthy behaviors that can protect one's eyesight. In addition, we will hear a perspective on how one local foundation is working to address the vision issues of older adults in the community. Joining me today are Dr. Christopher Girkin, Professor and Chair of the Department of Ophthalmology at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, Dr. Cynthia Owsley, Professor in the UAB Department of Ophthalmology, and Torrey DeKeyser, Executive Director of the Eyesight Foundation of Alabama. We welcome all of you. As we move to the next slide, Dr. Girkin, let's start with you. We have all probably heard of some of the conditions affecting the vision of older persons, but we probably don't really understand what all of these terms refer to. Could you give us an overview of vision and aging?
Sure. The eye, like the entire body, sort of breaks down as we get older. A leading biologist, Medawar, once said that aging is defined as the collection of changes that render human beings progressively more likely to die. And losing your vision certainly adds to that. It's one of these things that are critical to life being functional, and we all are dependent on it and just are visual creatures. So as we get older, just the normal process in an eye aging is that visual acuity will drop over time, and it's been seen in a number of studies, contrast sensitivity. If you can get the next slide. And our ability to process visual information, both our brain and our eyes slow with time, and that's a dual process. And, research to stop this decline not only can extend life, but probably more importantly, improve quality of life, not just the extent of life. So we're focused on attacking these causes of visual decline to make us both more functional and live longer. Next slide, please. So the big kind of four aging conditions are cataracts. And I'm not going to talk much about cataracts. Cataracts are a clouding of the lens of the eye that if we live long enough, we will all get. There is a very effective, very safe surgery for cataracts. So it's completely dealt with problem, but there's an implementable cure for cataracts. I'm going to focus primarily on diseases of the retina, which is the film that lines the back of the eye and takes the picture and sends it to the brain. And those are two primary diseases, macular degeneration and diabetic retinopathy. And glaucoma, which is a disease of the optic nerve, and the optic nerve connects the eye to the brain. And the reason why these are really important, if you damage the front of your eye, if you get a cataract, we can pretty much surgically fix most of those conditions. But if you damage the retina or you damage the optic nerve, either through trauma or disease, that's part of the brain. And just like part of the brain that's lost in a stroke, we do not know how to regrow it. We do not know how to recover its function. So it's critical that we understand these disease processes in the eye, these aging disease processes, so we can intervene to make everyone's eyes work better for a longer period of time. Next slide. So this is what the back of the eye looks like. This is at the very center, that little dot in the center of the screen is the macula, the fovea, and it's the area of the retina that does your fine acuity. All your readings done there. Right next to it, that little dot where all those blood vessels are coming out of, that's the optic nerve. And that's where, you can click the movie, please. That's where fibers from the retina, from all the cells in the retina that transmit the signal from the retina, pass through a hole in the back of the eye back to the brain. If you can click that again, please. There you go. So in glaucoma, we'll start with that. People think of glaucoma as pressure. The eye is a pressurized sphere. There's a part of the eye that makes fluid and a part of the eye that drains fluid away. Next slide. The pressure on the eye, in this inflated sphere, that pressure is felt by the wall of the eye. And the wall is this load-bearing structure, just like a bridge or any other mechanical structure, that fights that force and keeps the eye inflated. The hole in the back of the eye, which is the optic nerve through which all these fibers pass, is the weak point in the eye. And at a normal pressure and even at high pressure, all the forces within the eye, all those pressure forces, are driven to that weak point in the optic nerve. And that's precisely where all these precious fibers pass out of the back of the eye to send vision to the brain. So what glaucoma is damage to these fibers as they pass from the relatively high pressure to the low pressure environment inside and outside the eye. Next slide, please. So if you look at a normal optic nerve, that tissue's developed to support those fibers that pass from the inside of the eye to the outside of the eye. If you click, please. And over time, those tissues can deform under pressure and collapse. Hit next slide. And eventually squeeze off the nutrient supply and support to those fibers where they eventually die. Click, please. So if we look at that tissue, this is data from labs here at UAB. If we look at that tissue, that's a very complex tissue that's designed to physically support those axons, those fibers that pass out of the wall of the eye. And it's under continuous strain. It's being beat on by pressure 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And eventually that tissue breaks down, gets remodeled, just like a bridge collapses, and it can no longer support the fibers that are passing through it. Next slide, please. And as you can see, in the analogy to the bridge, there's on your right is a healthy lamina cribrosa. That's the tissue within the optic nerve that protects the fibers from the retina that are passing through it. And on the left is a destroyed, collapsed lamina cribrosa, and this is a severely diseased tissue in which all those nerve fibers that are passing through have lost their blood supply, lost their support, and they're dying. So our goal was to try to figure out how to maintain the structural integrity of the eye, so it protects those nerves as it leaves from the high pressure eye to the low pressure brain. If you can, next slide, please. Yeah, hit the movie, please. So as that tissue collapses, the underlying support tissue collapses, the nerve fibers within the eye collapse, and eventually the cells die out in the retina. Next slide, please. Move ahead, please. So what the patient sees is a gradual decreasing in their side vision. Next slide. Flip. As this nerve collapses and breaks apart, which is what we observe in the eye clinically. And eventually, the side vision gets sapped away to the point that central vision is profoundly affected, and that's why it's one of the leading causes of blindness. Next slide. The treatments for glaucoma, we have a variety of medications. We have laser treatments and surgical treatments, and they can all be employed primarily to lower pressure. We're really interested in ways to regrow the connections within the eye and prevent the damage at the optic nerve level. But right now, we're focused primarily, our currently available clinical treatments are on lowering the pressure in the eye through these mechanisms. But in general, most patients with glaucoma, if you can catch them early enough, can be treated, and you successfully prevent the damage due to aging. So there's a really important need to focus research on access to care, delivery of care, and better treatment modalities as we deal with our aging population. Next slide. So macular degeneration is degeneration of the macula. Degeneration is that key portion of the retina which holds all your fine acuity. And what happens as we get older is underneath the retina, deposits slowly develop called drusen. And these are little oil-filled deposits that form under the retina, and they impair nutrient delivery. They impair function of the vital cells that convert light into electrical signal to the brain. If you can, and many people have these drusen, but some will develop significant problem due to the drusen. And one of the problems is geographic atrophy, and this is atrophy of the underlying supportive cells under the retina that can occur in association with aging. Or, next slide, they can lead to new blood vessel growth under the retina that causes scarring and bleeding under the retina, and that can cause dramatic loss of central vision. Next slide. So functionally, macular degeneration is sort of the opposite of glaucoma. You lose your central acuity first, so it can be much more devastating on presentation, whereas glaucoma, you slowly lose your side vision until it finally affects your central vision. Next slide. As far as treatments for glaucoma, they're less developed, I think, than treatments in glaucoma. In macular degeneration, eating a healthy diet, controlling your blood pressure, and smoking cessation are probably the best things to do to prevent getting macular degeneration. Vitamin therapy has been shown in patients who have early signs of macular degeneration to retard its progression to more advanced stages of macular degeneration. And there's a variety of injectable drugs that can be injected inside the eye when you have that really bad form of macular degeneration where new blood vessels are growing out under the retina and there's a scarring, these anti-VEGF drugs. And they have really, in the last 5 years, gone a long way to restore the most severe cases of blindness due to macular degeneration. Next slide. So diabetic retinopathy is a growing problem in this country related to the growing problem with obesity. And diabetes, just as in the eye, as in everywhere, is not kind to your blood vessels. And you lose the blood supply to the retina with diabetes, with uncontrolled diabetes, just like you do everywhere in the body with your kidneys, with your fingers and toes. The problem in the retina is that when the blood vessels drop out, they start to leak. And that's called non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. And that's the most common form of diabetic retinopathy. And just like if you get a film of the camera wet, when the retina swells and gets full of fluid, the image it produces is very distorted, and that can cause loss of vision. And then continued loss of the blood supply to the retina and blindness. In a less common type of diabetic retinopathy, new blood vessels can grow out within the retina, and that can cause bleeding within the eye, a retinal detachment, and that's treated with laser treatment. And the slide on your left shows a retina that's been treated extensively with laser treatment to prevent this proliferation of new blood vessels. Next slide, please. So the primary treatment for diabetes is treating the diabetic retinopathy, is treating the diabetes, tight control of blood sugar, weight loss, diet, exercise. All those things are critical in controlling the overall problem to not only help the eye but the rest of the body. With non-proliferative retinopathy, we can control the blood sugar but also use laser treatments to block those leaky spots. And with proliferative diabetic retinopathy, that diffuse laser treatment, the dense laser treatment of the peripheral retina, all those little white spots, block the stimulus to produce new blood vessels. Obviously, blood sugar control is important at all stages of the disease, or the treatments won't be successful. I think that's my last slide.
Well, thank you, Dr. Girkin. That was an excellent introduction to the vision and aging process. Now we want to turn to Dr. Owsley. Now that we have that better understanding of the conditions that affect older persons, could you tell us about the impact of these conditions on everyday life?
Sure, I'm happy to do so. Could I have the next slide, please? And the next slide. So the everyday aspects of life I'm going to be talking about in terms of how vision and aging-related vision problems impact them are driving, reading, seeing at night, and also mobility. In other words, our walking around, our ability to get around by walking around, ambulatory mobility. If I could have the next slide, please. So as it turns out, one of the most dangerous things that can happen to an older driver is if they have visual processing speed that slows down. It has been estimated about 1 out of every 3 or 4 older adults has very slow visual processing speed. And what this refers to is your ability, how quickly you basically process visual information that comes in through your eyes and goes to your brain. And what we know is that older drivers with slow visual processing speed have about double the motor vehicle collision rate of drivers that have normal visual processing speed. So this is really a very critical issue to be aware of from a public health standpoint. Next slide, please. Another aspect of vision that impacts driving is contrast sensitivity. Contrast sensitivity impairment refers to the fact that as our eyes age, as Dr. Girkin mentioned, we develop cataracts. We also develop certain retinal changes, corneal changes in the front of the eye, which in some older adults can make the world appear to be washed out. The most common cause of contrast sensitivity impairment, of course, is cataract. And what our research has shown over the past few years is that moderate to severe impairment in contrast sensitivity increases crash risk by reducing the visibility of obstacles and roadway markings, as illustrated on the right. The next slide, please. One of the most fundamental aspects of being a human being is reading. And reading at near distances is a particular problem for older adults. And what happens as we age is that our ability of our lens to focus so that we can see up close starts to decline. And this is a condition technically called presbyopia. But this refers to the very common phenomenon that most of us as we age are familiar with, is that we have problems seeing up close. And this causes a problem, of course, for reading. But the fortunate thing is that it's very remediable through the intervention of wearing glasses or contact lenses. So that's the good news. Next slide, please. One aspect of vision that a lot of people are unaware of is seeing under low light levels. In fact, this is one of the most commonly cited problems by older adults when you do a survey or a questionnaire with them. Their vision at night or under dim illumination is more impaired than it used to be. Everybody has more problems seeing at night, but in older adults, it's much more severe. For example, it takes older adults about twice as long to adapt to darkness. For example, when you're out in bright sunlight and you go into a movie theater or cinema and then you have to wait for your eyes to adjust. It takes about twice as long for older adults to adjust to the darkness, also as compared to young adults. And as you can imagine, this also causes some problems with headlight glare, problems in night driving as well. If I could have the next slide, please. Another kind of frequent adverse event of aging that is related to vision impairment in older adults is falling. As it turns out, peripheral vision, the type of vision that is impaired in condition glaucoma, which Dr. Girkin talked about, or peripheral vision, or side vision, how most people refer to it, is very important for understanding mobility problems. In particular, older adults who have impaired peripheral vision have an increased risk for falls. So if you look at a visual field sensitivity map on the left, that person has very good peripheral vision. The person on the right, there at the bottom, you can see the dark areas. They have impaired visual sensitivity or no vision in those areas. And those are the adults who have a much higher risk of falling. The next slide, please. So the good news is there are interventions. There are steps one can take, whether it's a healthcare system or whether it's an individual or a family, in terms of reducing your risk for aging-related vision impairment. Probably the most important thing one can do is seeking annual routine dilated comprehensive eye care. Going to the ophthalmologist or optometrist about once a year, once every 2 years, depending upon what the doctor recommends in your particular situation. The reason this is so important, as Dr. Girkin mentioned, is that early detection of the eye diseases that he mentioned leads to the ability to preserve vision. In other words, the disease doesn't progress to the point of irreversible vision loss, or it's less likely to. Another very important intervention is cataract surgery. Cataract surgery has been shown to reduce crash risk in older drivers by 50%. So cataract surgery has a number of benefits. It can help improve your reading, seeing people around you, your environment, but it can also lead to you being a safer driver. Other things you can personally do is organizing your environment to optimize visibility by creating good lighting in your environment, and also organizing your environment to optimize mobility, making sure that there are not throw rugs around that you might not visually be able to detect as quickly as you used to, and other environmental modifications that can be executed in your home, which will reduce adverse events such as falls. The next slide, please. Before closing my part, I just want to mention some important resources on the web. The National Eye Institute has a program called the National Eye Health Education Program, which is a wonderful resource. It can be reached at that website there. If you go to that website and then look for Health Education Program, it's a program that provides information to not only healthcare providers, but patients and the public in general about the ways to preserve your vision and what you can do in your own life to enhance good eye health from birth to old age. Another important resource, also part of the National Institutes of Health, is the National Institute on Aging. Many informative websites, the Centers for Disease Control, particularly they have some very nice fact sheets on motor vehicle collision risk and falls risk, and also the Lighthouse Guild in New York also has a wonderful website with resources for, again, patients and the public as well as healthcare providers. The next slide, please. And I think that's the end of my slides.
Thank you so much, Dr. Owsley. Before we move on to our final speaker, I want to remind our audience that at the end of the presentation, after our next speaker, we will have an opportunity for you to ask questions. If you go to the bar on the right side of your screen, you will see a bar that has questions. You just open that and you type in your questions, and I will be asking them to our speakers later. You can start going ahead and doing that at this point or any time through the presentation. Also, we've had a couple requests for whether the slides and other materials are available, and the answer is yes. If you just send an email to info@asaging, ASAGING.org, info@asaging.org, and ask for the slides for the presentation, we'd be happy to send them to you. Also, the entire presentation will be available on a rebroadcast link in about a week. So anyone can go to that link and listen to the entire rebroadcast with the slides and so forth at that time. So at this point, Torrey, let's bring you back into the conversation and have you talk about a funder's response to these challenging issues. Tell us something about your own foundation's work and how you see other funders responding to these critical needs.
Oh, thank you, John. Obviously, you can tell from our foundation name, the Eyesight Foundation, that we're all about eye health care related activities. And you can go to the next slide now. Thank you. And so we certainly take the aging eye and the problems associated with it very seriously and have addressed it in our grant-making activities in a number of ways. First and foremost, we fund a good bit of scientific research, primarily at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, on these various diseases: macular degeneration, glaucoma, diabetic retinopathy, and some of these research activities involve collaborations with other institutions in other states. I know a lot of foundations don't fund in scientific research, but we do, and are very excited about some of the innovative activities that are going on in the laboratories and in clinical settings at UAB, and particularly those that translate from bench to bedside. So there's much to learn from the advancements that are being discovered at UAB and other institutions around the country. So if any of you have the ability to fund research, I certainly support that and would recommend it. Other things that are of a different nature, more of a public health outreach type activity, include such issues as supporting programs in your communities or your states that provide free or reduced cost drug programs, for example. Glaucoma, of course, is often treated with special drops that are prescribed by glaucoma specialists, and those are often quite expensive, and they tend to be an ongoing need for those patients and can be quite a struggle depending on their income, insurance status. So that is a wonderful thing to support. But likewise, programs that provide free or reduced cost eyeglasses, because as was pointed out earlier by Dr. Girkin, a lot of acuity issues show up in the aging eye. And so improved eyeglasses, particularly those that might be bifocals, that sort of thing. And if any of you have bought eyeglasses lately and pay for them out of your own pocket, they're quite expensive. So that's a huge help. Another thing that we have taken a big interest in and have put a lot of money into this area is low vision rehabilitation services. And for those who may not know what that is, it's a way, and if you would go to the next slide, please. It's a way to help a patient maximize the vision they have left. And I will come back to that in a minute after we go through some of these others. Access to care is a huge issue. And, of course, that's true of health care beyond just eye care. But we look at access to care from a financial point of view. Does the person have insurance or not? Do they live in a community where eye doctors, whether they're optometrists or ophthalmologists, exist and can be accessed? Alabama has a lot of large portion of the state is rural, and we have a number of healthcare deserts as a result. So we have been supporting some programs that typically involve a collaboration among optometrists, ophthalmologists, alliance clubs, and other providers who work together in concert to put on special eye clinics in those types of areas. And the Black Belt area of Alabama, which is the area of Alabama that's very rich in soil, happens to be one of the poorer areas of the state and is very, very rural. And there have been a number of programs that have come together to address that need. What's hard about that is it's an expensive undertaking. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's not worthwhile, but it's a challenge to make it comprehensive. But we've had a good bit of success working in concert with federally qualified community health centers, public health departments, so forth. So that's another possibility. Next slide, please. So I mentioned some of the Lions Clubs, the public health departments, so on. We have several programs that if anybody wanted to ask us about, we could share information with you. Just contact us via my email address. The Mobile County Health Department has an eye clinic that was collaboratively funded by the Lions International Club Foundation and the Eyesight Foundation and some local Lions clubs. Similarly, there's a program in Montgomery, Alabama at a fairly qualified health center. Same thing, LCIF, Eyesight Foundation, and local area Lions clubs came together to create eye clinics that help people regardless of their ability to pay. Some of these have a sliding fee scale. Some will take care of the patients even if they have no insurance or any ability to pay. Victory Health Partners is another program in Mobile, Alabama. It actually is a faith-based program, and we have purchased equipment for them and helped connect them to some programs that provide vouchers for free eyeglasses if that is the need. Next slide. So back on low vision rehabilitation services, this is one of our programs that we're very, very proud of supporting. Years ago, in the early years of the Eyesight Foundation, we did a statewide eye health needs assessment study. And one of the things that was reported in that study was the lack of availability of low vision rehabilitation services. As I mentioned, that is a process. It happens to involve, in this instance, the programs that we fund, a combination of support from ophthalmology, optometry, occupational therapy, psychology, so forth, that professionals from those fields work together to try to help a patient who perhaps has been told that they've there's nothing much left to do to save their vision. Perhaps they have macular degeneration or glaucoma, one of the other diseases that Dr. Girkin mentioned. And this is a way to help them deal with those issues that Dr. Owsley mentioned, the daily task of living, helping them maximize the vision they have left, helping them set up their lives in a way that's more manageable. And we have funded a program at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, that's been very successful in this regard, as well as a program in the Mobile, Alabama area that's not affiliated with the university but does a wonderful job as well, and that is called Community Services for Vision Rehabilitation. Often programs like this and then independent programs exist that provide low vision support groups. And so often when a person is faced with losing their sight, it's like a death, and they grieve and they want and can benefit from the support of others going through a similar situation. It is an encouraging activity, and they can learn about resources that exist to help them. And we have been involved with and supported a number of support groups in that regard. Next slide, please. Again, this slide just reinforces the value of low vision rehab services. Again, just sort of identifying some of the daily tasks that can help. One of the reasons it's important as a funder to consider low vision rehabilitation is these programs are very difficult to sustain through patient revenues. I've asked Dr. Girkin before what a busy day in his clinic might be in terms of number of patients seen, and he usually tells me 60 to 80 patients. Well, he's seeing them pretty quickly, obviously, but a low vision specialist who's trained in this particular field will spend 45 minutes or an hour per patient. So in terms of volume, they're not generating lots and lots of reimbursement revenue. And so it makes it very hard to sustain a clinic that way. And we've studied other low vision clinics, and many of them are very dependent on grants and support from foundations and other entities. So if there is a low vision rehab service in your community, and this is something you're interested in, I certainly would seek that out and learn more about it, because they may indeed benefit from your help. I might close my comments by noting a recent report that was published by Prevent Blindness, and they've done some very sophisticated calculations on the cost and economic burden of vision loss in America. And last year, their report revealed a cost of $139 billion a year, and I believe that number went up to about $150 billion this year, and they've now done a projection for the year 2050. And if the senior citizens continue to expand in terms of the percentage of our population, and if access to eye care kind of remains the way it is now, then they're projecting that cost will be between $700 and $800 billion, which is very, very staggering. And so it's very important for those of us who are funding in the aging field to try to address this, because it impacts so many other aspects of a person's ability to age well. And I thank you for giving us this opportunity to share what we've been doing for the last number of years with you. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Torrey, and thanks to all of our speakers. We're now going to turn to your questions, and we have a number already, but as a reminder, you can type in your questions at any time in the box that's on the right of your screen. If you just open the question area and type it in, I will be starting to ask our speakers about those now. So the first question is a more general one, then we'll get to a number of much more specific ones. And that's a question around, do you find in your practice that older people often feel that vision loss is inevitable, and for that reason don't seek care or don't think it is necessary or don't see the purpose of doing it? You talk about the importance of yearly eye exams, but I know in my own family that there's some resistance to that, because it's like, well, this is just what happens when you get old.
Yeah, I mean, I think it varies from person to person, from group to group. I think the amount of engagement with an individual person has with the health system and understanding of disease relates to how important they feel it is. Certainly knowledge of glaucoma, a family member that's gone through problems with glaucoma or macular degeneration or any disease of aging, those groups are more likely to see the value in eye care. But you're absolutely right. There's a number of people who don't seek eye care for a variety of reasons: transportation, convenience, understanding of what can be done and how it can be helpful, or lack of understanding of what can be done and what can be helpful. So, I think the key message there is to educate people that a lot of these conditions like glaucoma, a lot of the blindness from diabetes, obviously cataracts, there are ready treatments for that can prevent the problem. But there is a perception in some components that, of our population that blindness is kind of inevitable and your eyes will eventually break down, and that's just not true.
Okay. A question that I expected to come up, and actually several that are related, so I'll kind of combine them together, which is we are constantly bombarded, I think particularly if you watch the evening news on television, for ads about vitamins, diets, supplements, things that will protect your vision. What's your guidance on those products? Are there really diets or vitamins that will substantially help protect your eyes?
Well, the only really good data is from the ARAD study, of which Dr. Owsley was one of the site leaders here at UAB. And that study took a big group of patients from across the country with early changes in macular degeneration, and they divided devised a series of vitamin formulas, and most of these vitamins occupy, I won't say any one brand or another, but they had the AREDS formula written on the bottle. That's capital AREDS. And there's some with lutein, there's some different formulations for smokers and non-smokers, but those AREDS formulas are the only vitamins that have been shown in a well-designed multi-center trial to reduce the progression of macular degeneration to advanced disease. Really, all the other stuff is pretty low level of evidence. This is the highest science, the best science. The randomized trial that was done shows that these AREDS vitamins, and there's a variety of different brands out there. I don't know that there's any evidence that one brand is better than the other, but as long as they're the AREDS formula vitamins, that's the main thing. In addition to smoking cessation, which is really important, blood pressure control. But you still, I still would go see your eye doctor about it. But there's no evidence that one brand is better than the other. Or any of these special, there's a lot of small companies that come out with MAC. None of those have any evidence really behind them over what the ARED study showed. Do you agree with that, Cynthia?
Yes, I think that's accurate.
Okay. All right. Thanks. We have, like I say, a number of other interesting questions as well. A couple of more specific technical or clinical questions. Is there a correlation to eye issues and the use of asthma inhalers or other diseases of the respiratory system?
The main interaction, I guess, with asthma is glaucoma, and that some of the drugs from glaucoma can affect your asthma. The beta blockers can make your wheezing worse. So we certainly avoid those in glaucoma treatment. There are cases where the steroid inhalers that asthmatics sometimes use, the steroid in those inhalers can sometimes raise pressure. It's not nearly as common as an oral steroid you take by mouth, but it certainly can happen, and it's something to consider if pressure's up in someone with asthma.
Okay. And then I'll ask you one other of the clinical questions we've got, which is are there any new advances on Fuchs dystrophy? And you might explain what that disease is.
We didn't really get a whole lot into the cornea. Dr. Owsley's a macular degeneration specialist in her research, and I'm a glaucoma person, so we're more back of the eye people. But Fuchs dystrophy is a common condition in which the inner lining of the cornea can break down in some people as they age. It's not as big of a problem with modern cataract surgery. The main reason when that lining completely deteriorates, you can get swelling of the cornea, and that requires a corneal transplant. It's less of a problem now because modern cataract surgery is much more kinder on the cornea with newer techniques and devices. So we do a lot of less damage to the cornea when we take a cataract out. So there's less people who have Fuchs dystrophy that causes corneal failure after cataract surgery, which is a big cause. And there's also newer surgeries for Fuchs dystrophy, and that instead of doing a full-on corneal transplant where you're taking the whole cornea off, putting a new cornea on from some donor, we can just transplant now the inner lining of the cornea, which is those cells that die in Fuchs. And that's there's a variety of new types of corneal procedures, DMEC, DSEC, DLEC, in which just the inner layer of the cornea is transplanted. And that's a much safer procedure with much more rapid visual recovery. So it's a really advancing field right now. Those surgeries have just been out a few years, but it's really revolutionized the treatment of corneal disease, both corneal and corneal disease of aging, the main one of which is Fuchs dystrophy.
Okay. Torrey, a question for you as a funder. What would your recommendation be to be supportive of programs like this that specifically work with older people in rural areas?
That's a big challenge, and we are actually in the process of creating what we're going to probably call the Alabama Vision Coalition. Because of the nature of rural areas, the resources in those areas are so limited that you have to really work together with providers, with nonprofit organizations who have played some role in trying to educate the public or reach the public and get services to them. And it clearly can't happen in isolation. As a funder, we often, and I'm sure those other funders who are tuned into this webinar know, you often find out about different efforts that are underway among organizations that may not know each other. They may not know the work that is going on. And so being a catalyst to convene those groups together and look for common solutions is a real plus. Area agencies on aging are a program that we're going to be trying to look more into in terms of collaborating. Senior centers, faith-based organizations, trying to help educate community leaders, those sorts of things I think are a key. And this isn't a very direct answer to your question, but if the person who posed that would like to get back in touch with me after the webinar, I'd be happy to explore it more, or with anyone. I mean, it's a conundrum that's a big challenge, not just for eye care, for almost all health care. Dr. Girkin and Dr. Owsley actually have been working with funding from the Centers for Disease Control on a way to try to reach adults. Were they specifically older? Not necessarily. Well, yeah, probably so.
Over the age of 40.
Over the age of 40, but and identify earlier patients with glaucoma. And they were using, this is a demonstration project, and they actually were trying to figure out a way, how can we reach the most at-risk members of the population. And African Americans are 5 times more likely to have glaucoma than other members of our population. And so they were targeted, and they've actually come up with a really novel approach, partnering with vision centers at 2 Walmarts, one in Birmingham and one in Tuscaloosa. But, of course, Walmarts are in rural areas as well, and so they've been trying to identify these patients who may have absolutely no clue they have glaucoma and may not have otherwise gotten an eye exam, and using telemedicine, send the images to the glaucoma service at the university, where the specialist here can analyze and send back instructions to the vision center optometrist. And so they're still working on that project, and but it's the type of thing, if this turns out to be effective, could be replicated in urban areas and in rural areas. And so that's sort of isolating one particular disease, but it could have implications for others as well. And I hope, I'm going to defer to my colleagues here because they actually know more about, I'm sitting here trying to describe their very, very wonderful work, and I don't know if I've done it justice.
I think the whole role of teleophthalmology, as it's called, telemedicine, but specifically in ophthalmology, teleophthalmology has a great deal of potential for enhancing the eye health and the general health of rural Americans. So it's a pathway that many research teams are trying to establish its efficacy and its efficiency in addressing rural health needs.
That's great news because it is a very difficult population to reach in general on health issues. Let's stay with you, Dr. Owsley. And this is a question, because this is a question about sort of the world we live in today, which is many of us spend our days sitting in front of computer screens. By the end of the day, our eyes are weary and so on. Are there ways in which we can reduce the strain on our everyday eyesight issues? And also a question about if someone works in a low lighting area where, you know, like you say, when you come out into a brightly lit place, suddenly you're just blinded for a while. Are there things that can be done to minimize the impact of those things?
Well, the first thing you mentioned, I'm sorry, would you repeat the first part?
The first part was around working all day in front of a computer screen.
Right. Computer use, right. I think in terms of computer use, habitual computer use, intense computer use, which is now
I think, become the norm for many of us in the workplace, but also so many leisure activities are surrounding the computer as well. There really hasn't been a whole lot of research focused on the special problems that the aging population may experience with respect to computer use. There have been many surveys that have done sort of anecdotal reports indicating that there are fatigue issues, but actually I think we're just, the whole research field of looking at the mechanisms of this particular problem for the aging population is just now coming into focus, and there's more researchers focused on it. Having said all that, I think one of the very simple things that what can be done is making sure the luminance and contrast of your computer screen are set to a comfortable level. Many software programs and web pages have adjustable font sizes. For example, if you're reading the news on the website, you can adjust the print size, so if it's more comfortable to be larger, that's fine. And the other thing is this whole idea of making sure you're receiving routine, comprehensive eye care from your eye doctor so that you can have the best possible glasses that focus at the appropriate distance for computer use.
Okay, great. Before we turn to your final comments, we have one last question, and let me bring that up. And that's the question of what we also see are things, eye exercises or eye relaxation techniques or other kinds of things which help with the, I guess, the motor part of our eyes and vision. Are those shown to be effective?
Yeah, so there's, certainly taking a break from the computer screen can reduce eye strain. There's a big controversy about vision therapy between camps in ophthalmology and optometry and pediatrics. And if you look at I think most of the big meta-analyses that have been done and most of the studies that have been done that are well-designed, and there's a lot of not particularly well-designed work in the literature in vision therapy, there are exercises that help with specific types of problems like convergence insufficiency in particular, in which you can improve visual performance. Now, convergence insufficiency is relatively uncommon. There's a big market for vision therapy to treat reading and learning disorders and that sort of thing. There is no good evidence right now that that's helpful. Patients who lack binocular vision and have one good eye do very well in school. There's no appreciable differences in scholastic performance. But there's a big controversy. It costs a lot of money. It's a lot of time commitment. But there's no great, high-level evidence that vision therapy outside of treating convergence insufficiency, that specific condition, is helpful. Now, there are differences of opinion there, sir.
Okay. Well, thank you. At this point, I want to turn back to our speakers for one last comment from any of them, and I'll start with you, Dr. Girkin.
We all age, and it beats the alternative, but it's something we all face. And I think one of the things that's so important about treating and looking at new conditions that treat vision, and this is similar, I think, to musculoskeletal and neurodegenerative disease, is that treatments not only prolong life because they make the person or the organism more functional, but they improve the quality of life. And as we worry about all these diseases that take lives, and I can see why those are important, I think we really need to be focusing on extending quality of life and not just the quantity of life. If you can't see, can't think, and can't walk, it's not. It doesn't do you a whole lot of good.
All right. Dr. Owsley?
I just want to emphasize the importance of something we've mentioned a few times through the webinar today, and that is the importance of eye health education for the public. It's really getting the word out to consumers, to citizens, of the importance of maintaining good eye health, not only through routine, comprehensive eye care, but healthy habits in general. Smoking is something that causes all kinds of health problems, but the Surgeon General has recognized that smoking is actually a cause of cataract
and age-related macular degeneration, both of which were discussed by Dr. Girkin. So I think patient public health education with respect to eye health could really make a huge difference in this nation.
Thank you. Torrey?
The annual surveys of Americans' greatest health fears typically rank cancer, fear of cancer, as number one, and fear of blindness as number two. And if you stop and think about that, you can die from cancer, but you don't die from blindness or losing your vision. But people fear it almost as much as a disease that can take their life. And I think this is very significant and harkens back to Dr. Girkin's comment about quality of life. And with so many of our baby boomers moving into the senior citizen category, it's a little bit frightening realizing that if we have a lot of people who can't see well enough to take care of themselves, that's one more burden on our system of caring for the elderly in general. And I would encourage any funders who are participating who fund in things like housing for the elderly. Consider when you're looking at grants for programs that are doing that wonderful work to make sure that they're incorporating into any projects they're supporting obvious ways to make a space more user-friendly for someone who can't see. Likewise, if it's a device designed to help an elderly person stay independently at home, what if they can't see an LCD readout, a screen, so on and so forth. Some of these practical issues you would assume are addressed, but not always. Also, one of the great advancements that I think is helping people who can't see well are a lot of the iPads and other smart tablets and the iPhones and the technology that's come out with the computing age. And those are wonderful tools that can help people and are something that are worth exploring.
I want to thank Dr. Christopher Girkin, the professor and chair of the Department of Ophthalmology at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, Dr. Cynthia Owsley, professor at the UAB Department of Ophthalmology, and Torrey DeKeyser, the executive director of the Eyesight Foundation of Alabama, for their participation in today's program. We thank you all for all you do to make life better for older adults. I also want to thank the John A. Hartford Foundation, Research to Prevent Blindness, and the Eyesight Foundation of Alabama for their support of this program, as well as the American Society on Aging for their technical expertise. And finally, I want to thank all of you for participating in today's webinar. Have a great day.